So I've placed the lining of my stocking inside, and I'm going to line up the back seam of my lining to the back seam of my stocking, and the front seam of my stocking to the back seam of my lining, or front seam of the lining. So you want that to match up. You're going to pin around it, you're going to remove your extension table, and you're going to need to stretch as you sew. You can do a zigzag or you can do a straight stitch, it doesn't matter, and you're just going to go right over top of where you basted already. So there I've basted it in. So I have a tiny tuck right here. I didn't pull quite hard enough, but it shouldn't be noticeable because when I sew my cuff on, I'll be sewing at a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So now I need to fold my loop. I've measured it's 9 inches by 3 inches. The first step is to fold your loop into half and crease it. Then you're going to open it up again, and you're going to fold the end pieces into the center. Just like that. Then you're going to fold the folded edges so that they match. So we have no raw edges along this side here. Then it's your choice of what stitches you want to do. If you want to do a decorative E, F, G, H, I, J, K, or L, you can do so. You just need to make sure that you are changing your stitch length to 1 so that the actual decorative stitch will show. I'm going to do an edge stitch. So I'm going to use a 0, a 2.5. And the reason the 0 is I'm going to line up the center of my presser foot with my fold. Now that the center of the presser foot is along the fold, my needle is at 0, and that's going to give me a nice edge stitch. So now I've got my edge stitch, which is perfect. I'm going to take my loop and I'm going to fold it on top of itself like so. And I'm just going to stitch the bottom together. The key is that they are folded directly on top of itself. Now my loop is 4. Once your embroidery is finished, we now need to prepare our cuff so that we can do our scallops. So you're going to take your embroidery one where the scallops are marked. You're going to take your batting, so you've taken off of your other one, your other cuff, and you're going to place the cuff over top of the batting and pin it in place. You're going to zigzag around the entire side exactly like you did your stocking, and then we will be trimming the batting and then putting the other cuff, placing the other cuff on the back side. When you are sewing the zigzag on here, make sure you are stretching it slightly because some of the embroidery is going to pull a little bit on your cuff, and we need the distance. So the machine is at a 5C 2.5. You're going to tape your presser foot again. And just line up the center of the presser foot with the edge of the fabric. So here I've stitched it all the way around. You can see it's kind of pulling a little bit, but it should be okay by the time we put that on our stocking. You're going to trim the batting now. So now I've got my embroidered cuff, which has the scallops marked, my batting on here, Now I need to add my other batting on the other side, and we're going to create what's called a fiber fill sandwich. So line up your marks, your notches, and you're going to have to stretch a little bit because the top is kind of shrunk a little bit, and pin it in place. And then you're going to zigzag the two together. So we're going to have the fiber fill inside our two cuffs. It is more important that the top is even than the bottom, because this bottom under the scallops will get trimmed away. So now I have my cuff prepared, front side, the batting is in between, and my other side, my wrong side. Now you're ready to do your scallops, but before we start, we need to do a test run to make sure we know how to pivot. So the first thing we need to do is to create our sample. The sample is going to be 2 pieces of extra material that you have with some batting in between, and just zigzag the outside. Now we want to draw our scallops. I'm just going to take a friction pen and I'm just going to hand draw the scallop shape. You want to make sure you have at least 2 points in where you can practice. And you want to make sure that they're not going to be too up and down, because that's not mimicking the same scallop. Before we start doing our satin stitch, which is going to do for the scallops, we need to change our foot to a clear buttonhole foot. So you're going to take yours off, you're going to place it at the front and get a clear buttonhole foot and place that on. The next thing we need is a stabilizer underneath. This is a tearaway stabilizer. So once you have finished, you will tear this away after you've cut it. So you're going to place that underneath. And it doesn't really matter where you start from for your sample, except I want you to think about when you are doing it on your actual pattern piece, I want you to start doing your scallops on your actual piece at the back side first. That's going to allow you to get a couple practice runs before the scallops are going to show where your embroidery is. You tend to get better the more the scallops you do. So for my practice one, I think I'm going to start in the same direction as I will do on my cuff. For the satin stitch, it's a wide zigzag that's really close together. Now what you want to avoid though is that the bobbin thread isn't showing. So that's why we always want to make sure we have a full bobbin, the same color as the top, in the color that we want our scallops to be. So to test it out, you're just going to go somewhere where the scallops aren't. You're going to set your machine up for a 5C and you're going to go within the buttonhole area. Okay, you can go close to one, but don't go too close. And you're going to see where does it look good. The things that you're looking for is that your machine is actually going to be moving forward without a lot of direction from your hands. You're also looking that the stitch is very close together and is not gapping, and also isn't staying straight in one spot. So I really like the way this one looks, and I think I'm ready to start my scallops. Couple things to keep in mind when you're doing your scalloping is your pivoting. The thing you want to keep in mind is your pivoting. And when you look at the instruction sheet, you're going to be pivoting at the top. And the things that we want to do is we want to take a look at where our needle is going to end and where is it going to go next at the top. We want to make sure it's going over top of what we have just shown. We don't want to have a gap at the top. So when we look at these scallops here, you can see that there's a gap at the top. And what happened was the needle was on the wrong side when we pivoted and started again. This one here is perfect because what happened was when we started our zigzag over top, the needle was going across what we have already stitched. So you're lining up the center of your presser foot with the center of your scallop, and you're going to be using your hands just on the side to control. When you're doing it, you want to watch ahead of where you need to turn. And once you start to reach the top, you might want to hand wheel just a little bit to see where is the end of that tip. And then you can pivot. Now, the needle is right now on the left-hand side. When I pivot and I turn it down, I want to make sure my needle, when it jumps over, is going right over top of what I have just sewn. And if you look here, when the needle jumps to the right-hand side, it's going to go right over top of what I have just sewn. So what I've done is correct. The other thing you want to think about is that when you pivot, that you're not pivoting too much on an angle, that we're going to miss that squaring up. And now I'm ready to start again. And we're not going to get right down to where that first one is, and that's fine. So I'm coming to my top again. And I'm going to practice the pivot. And I'm going to take a look at where my needle is going. And my needle is going right over top of what I have just done. So that's perfect. So when I'm looking at my pivots, I want to make sure that I'm coming straight across. This one kind of wasn't angled as well. You can see it's overlapping where it should be. This one is much better. And you just want your scallops to look about even. So once you've done this, you're going to show it to me, and then you're going to be ready to do the scallops on your cuff. Don't tear off the stabilizer on this one, because every time you start to do a scallop, if the bell rings and you start again, you want to do a test run on the machine you're using. So here's my cuff. And I'm going to put the stabilizer underneath. Now my stabilizer isn't quite long enough, so you can use some scrap stabilizer that I will have for you at the front table. So you're going to place it underneath exactly like you did, and you're going to start. Cut your scallops really close to the edge, but don't cut through your actual stitching. And then you continue this all the way to the end. And then you're ready to sew your cuff together. So once you've cut all of your scallops, mine is mini right now, but it still shows you what to do. You're going to tear off your stabilizer, okay? And it will just tear off, just like that. Next thing your instructions say is you're going to use the good side to good side. So we'll pretend that this is my embroidery, okay? So I'm going to go good side to good side, and we're going to stitch right along the back. The key thing is that your scallops line up at the bottom, okay? We're not concerned about the top as much as we are along the bottom. And once you have that pinned, you will then start from the bottom. So start from the bottom and then sew all the way up to the top. And then you'll put your cuff into your stocking and we're almost done.